You had a birthday.
Yes, I did.
Like a week or so ago.
That's true.
Did it go well?
I think it went pretty well.
Do you feel older?
I feel exactly 33 in a week.
Sweet. Well, we're live again this week as normal. Today's Sunday, September 16th, 2007. This is the Atheist Experience. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, beginning at 11 o'clock, 11:30. I've forgotten what time we actually start on Sunday because I slept in today. But that's where we've been meeting now. We've changed that from some of our previous places.
I just had 8-hour classes for the last 2 straight days, so I've got reasons for being. If I seem unprepared this week, then that'll be my excuse.
You're prepared. So welcome everybody again. As I said, we have that regular Sunday meeting. And the audio portion of this program is available for download from the ACA website, www.atheist-community.org. And the video is available at Google Video. Hey, you can't see that at all. But my name's actually down there. See right there. They've, as usual, changed some stuff in the studio. We're trying to get used to it, so some of our title graphics have been messed up. But hey, that's the joys of public access live television, so we'll just keep on trucking. The video portion, as I said, is available on Google Video, and in addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. You can go to nonprofitsradio.com for more information. That show will be broadcast this coming Saturday from 2 to 3:30 Central. There's more information online. You can visit the ACA website for more information about any of our events and to visit the frequently asked questions portion of the website. This is a live call-in public access show where gives us the opportunity to interact with the public, answer questions, discuss issues, debate religious topics, whatever. But we are often receive a lot of the same calls over and over again. What do atheists believe? What don't atheists believe? What do you think happens when you die? Why are you an atheist? Why haven't you ever read the Bible? And questions like that are addressed on the frequently asked questions portion. Although we will answer those questions on the air as well. We just don't want to repeat ourselves. By the way, the answer to the question, have you ever read the Bible, is yes, and the response is, haven't you ever read anything else? Just a little joke I stole from Christopher Hitchens, by the way. The Sunday morning meetings, in addition to that, after the program's over, there's a square block right there on my head. After the program's over, everybody involved in the show gets together and go to IHOP at the corner of I-35 and Cesar Chavez. We're on until 4:30, and we'll be at IHOP from 5 to 7. The ACA also sponsors a number of interactive social events throughout the week, including Atheist Happy Hour at the Dog and Duck Pub on 17th and Guadalupe every Thursday at 7 o'clock. And we host a lecture series on the first Sunday of each month at the Austin History Center, located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. So we're actually going to try just co-opt Guadalupe as Atheist Street, since we do things at various stages of the road, and maybe make a drive out of it. I think the Scientology Center is also on Guadalupe too.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So we'll have like a Saturday outing
that's
where
the part right on campus, right?
Yeah, it's right next to the campus. So maybe we'll have a Saturday outing where we go get a free personality test and visit some of those spots. So, in addition to those events, we've also got a series of Wednesday night events. This Wednesday will be bowling at Austin 300. You can get more information at the website. Also, anybody who doesn't make it through on the telephone today or doesn't want to can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself, the co-host, and some of the people behind the scenes. We can't promise to answer every email, but we do read all of them. And any comments, questions, feedback, criticisms, concerns, death threats, I don't know. Whatever you feel like sending us, knock yourself out. So, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are concluding the seemingly interminable series that I've been doing on evolution, where last week I talked about evolutionary psychology, and there was a bit of a loose end at the end of that last presentation, and that was the part of evolutionary psychology that involves game theory. So I decided to make that a whole topic this month. And this will be the wrap-up to the whole evolution series.
So then we can start it all over again for next year.
There we go. Because people will never get it through their heads. No matter how much we try. Let's see. So the last time I was on the show, I had to go back and listen to myself to remind myself that I kind of left everybody with sort of a conundrum, which is, why would a soldier throw himself on a live grenade to rescue his buddies? It's kind of a nice thing to do, but if you think about it in evolutionary terms, where brain patterns are determined by evolutionary advantage, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do something really self-sacrificing for somebody else, because once you die, you have no more chance to pass on your genes, and that's not very helpful to you. And the interesting thing is that we actually see self-sacrificing behavior in nature as well. There's an example that's often used of prairie dogs, where prairie dogs have sort of this social hierarchy where there will often be one prairie dog who winds up getting to be the scout for the day. Or not even necessarily specific assignments, but they have this sort of understanding, if you will, that if a prairie dog is out and happens to see a predator, like a hawk or a snake or something that could be dangerous to all the other little prairie dogs, then the prairie dog will stand up and make a loud barking noise, which will alert all the other little prairie dogs to the presence of this danger. And the others can all presumably run for cover. But the problem with that is that if you stand up and bark, you make a very inviting target for yourself. You make it that much easier for the hawk or the snake to notice you, and you run the very real risk that you will be the one to get killed by the predator. Whereas if you would just shut up and run for safety, then you could protect your own little genes and not incur the risk of helping out others. So there's this very curious question, which is, why altruism? How could that ever happen? And the problem actually becomes more difficult if you think about it a little longer, because the question is, how could this behavior have evolved? And the thing is, as we've been talking about for the last few months, evolution doesn't work by big useful changes. It works a little bit at a time. So it makes very small changes in an individual, and if the small change happens to be beneficial to that individual, then it gets passed on. And if it tends to get the individual killed, then it doesn't get passed on. Now, this is really problematic for the thing about altruism is very problematic, because if any individual in a non-altruistic tribe of prairie dogs just evolved that trait of barking when a predator is near, then that would be the only one who gets killed. And so that one mutation would not last. And similarly, if there was a whole tribe full of altruistic prairie dogs, and one of them happened to evolve a mutation that made it non-altruistic, so it was like, hey, everybody else, thanks for the barking, but I'm not going to help you guys out if you're in trouble, that one would be particularly well suited to survive. Forget subtlety. People are trying to sneak water onto the set, but I'm thirsty.
Well, you may end up getting to this point later,
yep.
But there is also the issue of whether or not any of this actually qualifies as altruism, or whether altruism is even a real thing.
In a way, yeah.
And because the question is, what kind of motivations could there be for altruism? And one of the things is that there may not be any altruism at all. There may be some partially selfish motivation for the behavior, or what we witness, for example, among prairie dogs might not necessarily be this one voluntarily risking its own life to protect everybody else, but
right.
Instead a sort of kind of problem-solving solution where it's much better for, let's say, the faster runner to serve as a distraction to protect his offspring, etc.
Possibly, yeah. I guess if it comes to that, I kind of am am a believer in hedonism, which is everybody is ultimately after what they want to do or what makes them feel good.
Right.
And even people who say that, for instance, if they're Christians and they say, oh, I want to be nice so I can get to heaven. Well, getting to heaven is really an ultimately selfish goal.
Right.
In fact, one kind of little gotcha question that I like to ask Christians occasionally is, if you love me so much, then would you go to hell for me? Permanently, forever. Nobody would ever, I put it in various ways, like, would you trade your spot in heaven if you could do that, if God came and offered you that switch? Because, I'm an unsaved atheist. And nobody, I think, has ever said yes. They've tried to come up with some theological justification why that's not even a fair question. But
although if you ask them similarly, if they would volunteer to give up their spot in heaven so their child could go, I think you'd get a lot more people who'd be willing to do that.
I don't know, maybe. And
if any of them said yes, then of course, then you've always got the love your neighbor as yourself type.
Right, but I mean, what gets me is that they, a lot of people kind of accept that their unsaved family members are going to go to hell.
Sure.
I mean, oh well, I'm very sad that my mom won't accept my religion, but too bad for her. I'm sure God knows what He's doing.
Yeah.
But this is a side topic.
Sure.
So let's get back to sort of genetic altruism and ask, how is it that altruism can actually be beneficial in some way that makes sense in an evolutionary context, so that an individual altruist could actually survive, and things wouldn't just automatically degenerate into a whole tribe of selfish people or prairie dogs. And part of the answer, there's really two halves to the answer to this question, and part of the answer I kind of half answered last week when I was talking about genetic selection, where I was saying that the unit of selection is not really the individual organism, like a single person or a prairie dog, but it's a gene. And genes are expressed through various members of the same family. So I mentioned J.B.S. Haldane's joke where he said, I would never die for my brother, but I would die for 2 brothers or 8 cousins. And the reason for that was that, he had precisely calculated the amount of shared genetic material and realized that, if you die for your brother, then you're at least ensuring that half of your genes go on, because the 2 of you share a common amount of genes. And so if there is an evolved trait which makes you specifically help out your brother, or help out 2 or 3 brothers, for instance, then that's to the advantage of the gene. So whereas the individual may die, if it keeps more copies of the altruistic gene going, then that's an advantageous trait for the gene, not for the individual who's dead, but it's still something that could be seen as something that could evolve.
So you're talking about, for example, prairie dog A has the altruistic gene, reproduces, passes that gene along, then performs his essentially programmed altruistic behavior,
right,
which protects the others who have the gene, who then go on to replicate this later
Exactly.
on.
Or prairie dog A has 4 kids, and all 4 of them have the altruistic gene, and one day in an act of selflessness, one of the 4 kids rescues the other 3. And that one prairie dog is actually doing a lot to help his
right.
Particular altruistic gene get passed on. Now, this doesn't completely apply in the case of the soldier jumping on the grenade to rescue his buddies, because odds are most soldiers aren't related to each other. But then again, the evolutionary environment where we grew up didn't have us getting thrown together with a whole lot of strangers. Again, we kind of evolved in sort of small tribal societies where you don't have cars and airplanes that can carry you all over the world. Most of the time you're going to grow up with people who are at least somewhat related to you. And as a result, we tend to be really bad at knowing in an intuitive sense who our family members are. I mean, like last month I talked about how we feel love for certain kinds of people, for our children or our brothers and sisters, or for the people who will potentially help us produce those children, i.e. people who will have sex with us. And
people who will do that? Sorry.
And so the thing is, we have these emotions that we're not in control of. We feel love towards people, and even though we might know in an intellectual sense whether people are actually related to us, we also have these instincts that are sort of based on sort of psychological rules of thumb. And a lot of times we're fairly bad at actually knowing exactly who's related to us, but we do have psychological rules of thumb, like if this person took care of us, then we love them. If they grew up with us, then they're likely to be a brother or a sister, so we love them. An example of a side effect of that fact is that kids tend not to want to marry their adoptive brothers or sisters. That just hardly ever happens, because there's the same kind of icky feeling that you would get from thinking about marrying your brother or sister, which has an evolutionary advantage, having that icky feeling, I mean, also translates to not really feeling entirely comfortable with somebody else who you've treated as a brother or a sister for your entire life. Intellectually, it would be fine to marry your adoptive brother or sister, but in an emotional way, you probably wouldn't want to do that.
That to me, though, is a fine example of the actual kind of problem that we're talking about here, which is these altruistic or other traits that maybe perhaps you could call pseudo-altruistic, would have evolved normally to apply to a family unit, but we are in a society where we've extended the family unit,
right,
and redefined the types of things that we equate with family units, right up to nationalism, for example.
Sure, absolutely.
All of these people in the United States are, to some degree, a part of my extended family that can provide benefit to me, so it's in my interest to,
Yeah, and I will say there is a lot of psychological manipulation that sort of helps you to get to the point where you feel that you love your country members as much as, well, maybe a little less than your direct family. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's a good or a bad thing. That's just what happens.
Well, if you talk about manipulation from kind of that, we're going to kind of infuse ourselves as your extended family, then the church, especially the Christian church, is one of the prime examples of that, where the entire discussion is about brother this, sister that, father this, mother that. They're artificially creating a new family and using the same language to kind of.
You mean like fatherland and that sort of thing? Yeah. Yeah, good point.
We use that language to kind of, because it works. Because it informs people as to what their extended family ought to be. That we should be included because we share these same ideas. We go to the same church. We live in the same country. Whatever.
Right. So, by the way, I forgot to say I really wanted to maybe pick up one early caller so that they could discuss a topic of my choosing. So I would like some good sport to call in, who ideally considers himself at least somewhat intelligent and has not heard of the prisoner's dilemma before, because that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute. So if there's anyone out there who would like to talk about that with me for a minute, then please call. The number should appear on the screen in a minute if they're paying attention to me.
It's up.
Thanks. So let's see. Where was I going? So we've got the soldier who throws himself on the grenade, maybe in a way almost out of a misguided emotional feeling that these people actually are fellow carriers of their own genetic material.
Brothers in arms.
Right. And we don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, the fact that they actually made a mistake doesn't mean that we are considering them stupid. That's just, oh, hey, another side effect of the new screen stuff. Sorry. we don't see it. Let's see. We see it as a good and noble thing because that's kind of the way we think about morality. So that's one reason why soldiers and individual members of species would exhibit altruistic behavior. Now, there's a whole other category of relationships that we didn't really get around to talking about in the episode that was mostly about evolutionary psychology. I talked mostly about love in that episode, but there's another kind of relationship which is simply friendship. Which can, in extreme examples, develop into something very similar to love, but it's not the same kind of love that's a romantic love with a potential sex partner, or the same kind of family love that you feel towards your parents, your kids, your brothers and sisters. Just plain old friendship is when you meet a stranger, you haven't grown up with them, you do things together and you feel good feelings for them, and you would make sacrifices for them. Maybe not always throwing yourself on a grenade, but often doing things like loaning them money or giving them a place to live, helping them when they need help, just that general sort of thing. And these kind of complex relationships are kind of what game theory was made to address. If you've ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, where this sort of semi-crazy guy, John Nash, was going around, he was extremely paranoid, but he was also making up these brilliant theories which were never really explained. A lot of what John Nash was concerned with was game theory, so you might want to go back and watch that again.
When you say it was never really explained, you mean it was never really explained in the movie?
In the movie.
Yeah.
Right. So game theory has a number of sort of made-up games. And when I talk about games, I don't mean a game like chess, because when mathematicians talk about chess, they say chess isn't a game. And the reason chess isn't a game is because it has a finite but very large number of possible states. Chess is what they consider a problem that could be solved. If you had an infinitely large computer, you could just represent every single chess game, and then you would have a perfect chess player. But games, as we talk about them in game theory, games as we talk about them in game theory deal a lot in psychology. So a better example of a game theory game would be poker. Or this thing that we refer to as the prisoner's dilemma, which is going to take some explaining, but I'm getting warned that we have a caller and we should engage them before they hang up.
So is it Alia?
Yeah, Alia.
Alia?
Hi, Alia.
Okay, thanks.
What's going on, guys?
No.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm watching the show. This is the first time I'm seeing you guys, and I thought what y'all were talking about was very interesting.
Okay, well, glad to hear it.
Well, cool. Maybe you'll have fun with this with us here.
All right, maybe. Let me get the picture up. I put up a title which explains the rules of this game. And it basically goes like this, and this is going to take some explaining. Don't be intimidated by these binary number looking things, but I'm sorry, not binary, but it goes like this. You have been arrested, and you are in jail. The police have accused you of a crime. Maybe you committed it, but it doesn't matter to the game. The point is that you're in jail, you're facing a certain number of years sentencing. Not only are you in jail, but also you have somebody they think is your accomplice. So they believe that either you both committed the crime together or you're innocent. You with me so far?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, a policeman comes to you the night before your trial, and he says, okay, look, here's the deal. You are going to be given a chance to either plead innocent or plead guilty. Now, The thing is, we have enough circumstantial evidence to pin on you, even if you plead innocent. So if you both plead innocent, then we're going to charge you with a lesser crime, which is not really what we want, but you're both going to get 1 year in jail. Now, if you both plead guilty, then then obviously we'll be able to prove that you both did it, or at least to the jury's satisfaction. So you'll both get 3 years. So if you plead guilty, both 3. If you plead innocent, both 1. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Now here's the catch. We want somebody to plead guilty. Obviously, it would look better for us if we could prove that one of you is definitely guilty. So here's what we're gonna offer you. If you plead innocent and your partner pleads, if you plead guilty and your partner pleads innocent, then you will be basically squealing on your partner, and so you get to go free. You get 0 years in jail for pleading guilty for basically turning on your partner, while your partner gets the maximum sentence for trying to pretend he's innocent when we know he's guilty. He gets 5 years. But we're offering the same deal to the other guy. So if you plead innocent and he pleads guilty, then he goes free and you get 5 years, which is the worst possible thing for you. So what do you do?
It's very interesting that you bring this topic up, because I had a very, very similar incident happen in my life, except it was
Really?
in regarding school and college.
Okay.
And one student would be kicked out, and just exactly what you're saying was the circumstances.
That's a pretty amazing coincidence, I guess.
Very, very much so. I refuse to, if I believe that both of us are innocent,
Okay.
and we're not guilty, and I chose to remain innocent and not squeal on him, because we both would have gotten in trouble for something that we both didn't do. I refused to plead guilty. I took basically all of the, why should two people get kicked out of college for something that we're innocent for? I'm a very stubborn person.
Right.
I will remain my ground and not, I don't have fear as to what is going to be done for me for the sake of remaining true to what's going on, like true to whatever. If I believe that I'm innocent, and I believe I had every right to write a certain paper, and I believe I had every right to say what I wanted to say and needed to say, I'll endure the year or 5 years of prison over.
That's an interesting answer, but let me raise the stakes a little and take the nobility out of it. You did it. Let's say that in this particular case you actually did the crime, and you're just trying to come up with, and all you really care about is minimizing your years in jail. Is your answer any different?
Well, if we alter it in that way, then we've altered my personality, and then I've become different.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about a hypothetical. We're not.
Right.
We're not,
We're talking in theory.
Hypothetically speaking, if I'm only concerned with my years, then absolutely I'd probably change my stance, because now my morality and my morals have changed. So
Okay,
yes,
so
of course.
in that case, would you plead innocent or guilty?
In that case, I would probably plead guilty, because I'm not concerned with my belief system that I have the right to freedom of speech, or I have the right to speak.
Right.
What is my
So,
morals would change.
Your guilty plea is basically going to get you either 3 years in jail, if your partner also pleads guilty, or it's going to get you out of jail, free, if your partner pleads innocent. And I think if our audience, and I'm sorry that the podcast audience can't see this, but I mean, if people take a look at this, what they'll realize is that the best possible thing for the individual is to do what you said you do, which is plead guilty.
Plead guilty hypothetically?
If all you care about is getting the fewest possible years in prison, then you're always better off pleading guilty, no matter what the other guy does.
Yeah, but that's hypothetically speaking. A lot of people that I know, or some people that I know, would remain their ground, and you know, you can't let somebody scare you and just crawl into a hole. You have to stand up and say no. You know,
right.
I am.
Well, I mean, it's true that that's the nobler thing to do, but when you break down the odds, if all you care about is the jail time and not feelings of self-worth, let's say, then it just follows that, let's say your partner pleads innocent. If your partner pleads innocent, then you can either plead guilty and go free, or plead innocent and get 1 year. Going free is better. If your partner pleads guilty, then you can either also plead guilty and get 3 years, or plead innocent and plead 5. So, as long as your only concern is the number of years, you're always better off pleading guilty. You see what I mean?
Do you think that do you think that that's the only choice, that there's more people that they only care about the years, or there are equally enough people that might stand up and say, absolutely not, you know?
Well, that's an interesting question, but it also falls kind of outside of game theory, because game theory is sort of outside the realm of people acting emotionally out of some sense of nobility, and more in the realm of people just acting out of what we would call rational self-interest. Anyway, but the really interesting thing about this dilemma, now I just said that you're always better off pleading guilty, except that the interesting thing is that also applies to your partner. So usually what's going to happen is that both people plead guilty, and you're going to get 3 years each. Yeah, I can't point very well. Yes, you're both going to get 3 years each for pleading guilty, whereas obviously the best option would be if if you had both pleaded innocent, you would both get fewer years. So the funny thing about the prisoner's dilemma is that by doing rationally what's best for you, you actually screw the other guy and make the outcome the worst possible for the both of you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, hypothetically, I would have picked the wrong thing, but
well,
naturally,
maybe.
Well, I'm not saying it's a right or a wrong thing. I mean, it's what's, you know, it depends on how you see things. I mean, if you care about this person and you're concerned about how many years they get, then your answer is going to be different. But that's not the way this is set up.
And also, it's hard to say. I mean, you know, we're not really talking about an ethical question. We're talking about a game question. So whether or not your answer is right or wrong also depends on what the other person does.
That's
something
true.
To take this out of the kind of whether you're innocent or whether you're guilty.
I think we're gonna prolong this discussion and just say thanks for calling, Alia.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question and make a comment.
Sure.
What is the show based on? Like, what is the like? If you had to give an objective to the show, what is that objective?
Well, I think one of the main goals is to just promote dialogue between religious people and non-religious people, with the goal of eliminating a lot of the misperceptions that people have about what atheists are and what we believe, but also on a personal level, as somebody who was, you know, a fairly serious Christian for a number of years to the point of wanting to be a minister, I just want to disseminate information that would help people free themselves from religious belief.
And also, I would say that if you were going to ask why I do topics like this that don't obviously relate to atheism, my answer would be, you know, if we're talking to a group of people who already don't believe in God, you know, we can't just sit here talking about how, hey, still no God every week. I like to talk about this kind of thing because once you decide you don't believe in God, there's still a lot of philosophical questions remaining, like, you know, okay, well, if there's no God, then how do I live my life, and what kind of things are going to influence me, and, you know, how do I act intelligently in a world that just has people in it? And that's why I've been talking about evolution for so long, and why I thought game theory would be an interesting topic this week.
I thought it was interesting because I saw atheist community and so forth on the banner behind. And I thought it was kind of funny because if you guys don't believe in God, and that's the topic of the show, then it's funny because that's almost like saying we don't believe in unicorns, and every week or every month we're going to have a show about it, you know? So,
right.
Which would be extremely useless, except for the fact that we live in a world where the vast majority of people actually do believe in unicorns, and not everybody tunes in, every week.
I haven't met a lot of people who do believe in unicorns.
I was using that as an analogy for God. Yeah. Sorry.
And one last comment you said earlier. You said something like, "Is there anybody that would die, for me, or if they would, go to hell for me? I don't know anybody that would." There is one person who actually did die for you and did go to hell for you, and his name is...
I'm not going to buy that as an answer, because if you're going to say Jesus Christ, then he went to hell for 3 days, and after that he got to live in an eternity, for an eternity in heaven, as the ruler of the universe. So when it comes to sacrifices,
yeah, I mean, how's that much of a sacrifice? I mean, at least when Elvis died for my sins, he stayed dead.
Hey, I don't know many people that would roll up their sleeves and put their hands in a whole bunch of doo-doo for you, but I know one man who did.
Well, how do you know that he did? Because there's no evidence.
There is evidence. It's documented historically.
Really? Where?
Yeah.
Where?
I mean, plenty of things. If you go to the land, that the Bible talks about, there are places. It's almost like...
What land is that?
You're reading... I mean... Every biblical place in the Bible is documented as...
And New York is a real place, but that doesn't mean Spider-Man's real.
Yeah, but that's different. Like, basically, you have
how is
40
it different?
It's different like this. If 40 people witnessed a car accident and they're all giving their version of it...
No, the Bible wasn't written by eyewitnesses.
It was written by people that... They didn't have the resources that we have today. Just because today we do things differently, the word of mouth spreads differently there. People didn't have the resources that we do today.
I don't understand why that's relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, if you look at the Bible, at the story of Jesus as it's represented in the Bible, you've got a number of claims, a virgin birth, a ton of miracles, this death and resurrection thing, and all of it is, at best, hearsay. It's a translation of a copy of hearsay of hearsay of hearsay. There's no first person accounts. There's no contemporary evidence that Jesus ever existed, and the Bible's full of historical errors. When you take a look at the Gospels, you've got Luke putting Jesus' birth at the time of Quirinius, and Matthew putting it at the time of Herod. Now there's a whole decade in between.
Same circumstance. If somebody was reporting a car accident, some people would alter little. Say, "Oh, I saw it like this," and another person will say, "I saw it like that." But the main theme or the main thing of the accident would still be the same, with minor details different.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you had a car accident where one person was reporting that it was in Detroit and one person was reporting that it happened in San Francisco, you might wonder whether those people actually really saw the same car accident.
Well, let me ask you this.
And mean, there are passages in the Bible where one gospel says that Jesus showed up in a completely different city from another gospel.
Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing would happen if you passed away and your friends were talking about your life and saying, "Oh, I remember when he was like this," and one friend would remember it a certain way, and
yes, but none of my friends
another certain way.
But none of my
I remember that night, but he might have some of the details.
None of my friends are going to claim that I rose from the dead or walked on water. Just because
but they might remember things like you wrote a book and you did this and you did that.
So what?
So the things that you did do, they would recall and speak proudly of the things that you did.
Hang on, I had to put you on hold because we have a problem with the mics where you can't hear over it. I'll bring you right back. There's a difference between accepting secondhand hearsay, testimonial, anecdotal evidence for mundane things like he wrote a book or he said good morning to me every day. And there's a difference between that and accepting this anecdotal testimonial evidence for he fed 5,000 people with a few loaves and fishes or rose again after being dead. Those situations are not equal. You have to have more evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And when we're talking about Jesus, outside of the Bible, which none of it is written by any eyewitnesses. There is no contemporary account that the guy even existed at all. And when you've got a situation where there's no confirming evidence, the Bible gets historical facts wrong, and it makes extraordinary claims, then there's insufficient justification to believe it. And in reality, you're only believing it because you want to believe it.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's not so much that, like, how can I put into words what I want to say? You said something about how it's not historical, or that he might not have even existed.
Right, and you
it's so
said,
strange to me how that could be possible.
You know why?
He didn't what?
You know why it's strange to you? Because you haven't bothered to research it. You came on early on saying that this was all historical stuff and it's verified, and all you need to do is go to the land that the Bible talks about.
Absolutely. Do you see exactly where Jesus walked and the things that he did?
No. You're not understanding. Those are claims you're making, and none of them are true. You haven't bothered to research this. What you've done is you've accepted claims from the pulpit. People will tell you this is all historically verifiable, when in fact none of it is. Yes, you can go to the land where people say that he walked, but there's no evidence there that it actually happened, and there's certainly no evidence that somebody died and rose from the dead.
Historically, there is in other documentations.
No, there's not. I'm sorry. I mean, if all you're going to do is keep asserting that there is, and I'm going to keep telling you that there isn't, then we're going to get nowhere. And what I'd actually recommend you do is read a book on history, read some ideas from people who don't necessarily support your preconceived notions. Read some stuff by Robert M. Price on the historicity of Jesus. Hell, go to Wikipedia and look up the historicity of Jesus. Try and call me back in a week, email me, whatever. Provide any single contemporary account, contemporary with when Jesus was supposed to live, that mentions him at all or anything he did. You won't be able to find it, I guarantee you. All these Christian scholars and apologists have been looking for this for the last 2,000 years. They've been unable to find it. But if you do, I'll let you come in and sit next to me on the show and tell it to everybody. Because it just doesn't happen. It's not there. Now, I'm not saying the guy didn't exist. There may, in fact, have been somebody who existed named Jesus. May have been an itinerant rabbi, for all I know. But when you start making claims about this is all historically verifiable, and if you just go to the land and you just do the research, it's simply not true. You're spewing out misinformation that you've been fed in order to prop up a lie that you believe. You have to come with better evidence than, oh, yes, it is. It just doesn't work that way. But anyway, back to the prisoner's dilemma.
Thanks, Matt. And I do want to thank Alia for coming on and being a good sport about talking about the prisoner's dilemma with me, because I like to bounce this off of somebody who hasn't heard it before.
There's a twist on the prisoner's dilemma that I was going to get to.
Yeah.
There's actually a game show called Friend or Foe that made use of this, where at the end of the game show, you've got some prize money.
Yeah.
And the two of you and your opponent get to vote. So if there's $1,000 in there, and we both choose to be friends, we each get $500. Mm-hmm. And if we both choose to be foes, we each get nothing.
Okay.
But if I go foe and you go friend, I get the whole grand. And so that's the way the prisoner's dilemma works out in that sense. I was going to use that as an example because it takes away the innocent or guilty thing.
Yeah, because if you're just a couple of strangers on the game show, then that's really kind of the essence of game theory, is that you don't know the other person, you don't have any moral feelings about them, you just want to win. And that's why it's called game theory.
And you're trying to just win the game, which is one of the things I really liked about the friend or foe thing.
And if you, if you don't believe that sort of thing happens in real life, not in a game, the prisoner's dilemma is sort of an abstracted idea to represent things that happen all the time in real life. And usually they happen not between just two people, but on a large scale with a lot of people. In fact, in economics, there's this well-known concept called the tragedy of the commons, where you have in sort of an agricultural society, you have people with a certain number of cows. And the more cows you own, basically the richer you are. But the cows all have to graze on common land. There's a limited amount of land with a limited amount of grass that every cow can use for food. And when you decide whether or not to get another cow or not, the calculation you're making is basically, the more cows you have, the better off you are. but the worse off everybody else is, because if there's too many cows, then they wind up overgrazing the field. There's not enough grass to go around. It doesn't grow back fast enough to make up for how fast the cows are eating it, and eventually the cows all starve. But at any given time, the rational thing to do is still to get as many cows as possible, because while there's a small drawback to yourself to get another cow, there's a big drawback in basically making you a better off and wealthier person. And so, just like in the prisoner's dilemma, the point is that the action which is in your own rational self-interest screws over the group. And to bring it up to modern times, there are things that happen like we're asked to conserve water, for instance, because we're environmentally conscious. So I think most houses now have installed these environmental things on all the faucets so that it limits the flow of water. But I really like a good invigorating shower. And if I take that little thing that restricts the flow of water off of my shower, then I enjoy a nice shower every day. And odds are, I don't really feel the personal consequences of using more water. If everybody else is if everybody else has taken those spigots off, then hey, I might as well take mine off because they're going to use up all the water anyway. And if nobody else has taken off their spigot, then hey, I might as well take mine because we're doing fine. And so there really are, and another example is carpool lanes, where you could drive in the carpool lane. I guess I haven't seen a lot of carpool lanes in Austin, but in California they're all over the place.
It's Texas, we produce oil.
Yeah, right. The point of a carpool lane is you're supposed to conserve gas by carrying somebody else, and if you have at least two people in the car, then you get to be special and drive in this mostly empty lane where you can go much faster. But if you get in the carpool lane with just yourself, odds are you won't get caught. And the personal impact of the extra gas that you use by just driving yourself, it isn't felt by you, it's felt by other people. So that's another prisoner's dilemma. And part of the problem of evolving altruism is, hey, how do we explain that people, how is it possible that given a situation like a prisoner's dilemma, where the thing that you do that's best for you is also the thing that you do that is the worst thing for everybody else besides you? How can we ever get in one of those situations and just not have everybody do the worst possible thing for all concerned? And the answer is, this tragedy of the commons thing is a special case, but most of the time when we deal with a prisoner's dilemma in real life, when we're trying to decide whether to help somebody out or just do whatever's selfishly best for us, we're not only we're dealing with people who we're meeting personally. We're trying to decide whether to treat the other person fairly or not. And we're not just meeting this person for the one and only time that we will ever see them in our lives. Most of the people we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis, at least this is more true when we're in little tribes, but if you're in a tribe, then most of the people you meet in your entire life, you will meet again. And while it seems like picking the option of screwing over the other person is the best thing in the individual case, if you're going to meet the person over and over again, they're going to remember the fact that you screwed them over last time, and they're going to be that much less likely to help you out next time. And there's a lot of complex evolutionary psychology things that go into this decision, but basically I'll cut to the shortcut answer, which is that it turns out that even on an individual case-by-case basis, what works best whenever you find yourself thrown into a prisoner's dilemma with somebody is start out by treating the other person fairly. Plead innocent the first time you meet them. That we call that the cooperate option because it's the thing that's good for everybody. And if that person does not cooperate, they defect in game theory lingo. They do things that are best for them but bad for you. Then you defect next time. And from then on, you treat them exactly the same way they've treated you. If they cooperated last time, you cooperate. If they defected last time, you defect. It's the simplest possible strategy for playing a game theory with one person that you meet over and over and over again. And usually the result is that if the people are fairly intelligent and they have no particular reason to distrust each other, then they'll just cooperate and help each other all the time. And that's beneficial for everybody. And that helps survival, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and when you're talking about things in this broad sense where you have hundreds of thousands of interactions over a lifetime and different people, and in the course of looking at it from the evolutionary standpoint, millions of years of change, it makes sense that this type of thing would evolve. As a matter of fact, as interesting and as cool as game theory and the prisoner's dilemma is to contemplate, it's really fairly simplistic on one level, and that is that you've got the ethic of reciprocity, which has been paraphrased as the golden rule, which is treat others as you would have them treat you, etc. That all plays into the way the prisoner dilemma works in reality in everybody's lives.
Sure, and of course the downside of that is that if you meet somebody and they treat you badly, then they're kind of you miss a few chances at reconciliation. Odds are that you're going to wind up lifelong enemies.
Yeah.
Although there's also something to be said in intelligent behavior for occasionally forgiving the other person to see if they'll follow suit and start being your friend, because it's always better to have a friend than an enemy. And so, it's even been suggested that the reason we have these big giant brains compared to everybody else, compared to all the other species that have to get by on just being huge and strong or faster than us or very small and quick. The reason that our particular niche is the reason that we have fallen into this particular niche of being very intelligent is not to outwit all the other animals around us, but to outwit each other. That we're in some kind of sort of evolutionary arms race where ultimately what happens is everybody's trying to get an advantage by understanding these very complicated social dances that we have, whether you're in a tribe or in a society or a global society with 6 billion people, where you figure out what's not just in your selfish best interest, but what is the most intelligent thing to do to have successful relationships with everybody in the world and deal with people who try to screw you over. And so I guess that's as good a note as any to say that's the end of the evolution topic.
Cool. Well, and I've enjoyed it. I know we're going to hit on a bunch of other things real quick, but I want to go ahead and take some more calls. The number's up on the screen. As a reminder, we are live. Today is September 16th, 2007. There was, and also, for those of you who are watching or interested, any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us for dinner after the show. We're going to IHOP at the corner of I-35 and Cesar Chavez. Last week, there were some folks who called in because evidently I was being mean. Because I'm wont to be mean on occasion.
Sometimes.
But they only called in to tell our call screener that we were mocking God and that we were going to hell, and then they'd hang up, and they didn't want to go on the air to talk about it. And while I was pretty forceful earlier with Alia with regard to making bald assertions about things that simply aren't true or haven't been demonstrated, I don't want anybody to think that I was being particularly mean or personal. What we're talking about there are beliefs and ideas, and I have no problem with Alia at all as a person, and we're welcome to have all kinds of discussions. And she can call back anytime she wants and talk about more or email. But I don't want to keep spinning wheels
Right. Well,
Jesus existed. Well, prove it. It's just true. Well, prove it. Well, if you just look, prove it. You get nowhere that way.
right.
On the other hand, we have somebody who's calling in now who evidently thinks I got it all wrong and that Jesus isn't a God. Is this Steve?
Yeah, that's him.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing fine, sir. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, I was just listening to you. I have no qualms about what you say because let me turn my TV down a little if you don't mind.
That's
Good
cool.
plan.
Yeah, just a second.
Always a good start.
Yeah, I've been in Austin for a long time. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay, good. I just didn't want to sound like I'm yelling. I've been in Austin a long time, and actually, I've done some biblical research and stuff. And I was starting to tell whoever the gentleman was earlier, who was very polite. I don't think God really cares whether or not you believe He exists or not. I really don't. I don't know why there's this war going on, especially with the 3-in-1 people who get all excited about the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. They can even explain the Trinity to anyone or whatever, because you know what? God doesn't want to look like a three-horned whatever. But my question is this, is that, okay, there's a lot of things we can't explain. We know they exist. We know electricity exists. We know air exists. We know a lot of things that we can't see, taste,
we
or
can
touch.
explain
But
all
we
those
can
things.
explain those things, by the way.
But not to the extremity where we can actually physically say, hey, there's air. You know, maybe we can do some dust in the air and throw it, whatever.
No,
But
you're
much,
talking
yeah.
about things that are measurable, identifiable, and pretty well understood. We may not have an absolute understanding of how everything works,
I mean, things that are physical, you can actually study through physics. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with you.
air is particles,
Absolutely.
and they have
Absolutely.
a specific
Right.
composition.
I've
and
got
so
no
on.
problem with that. But what bothers me is that I think the problem is that people don't realize that. And I mean, I don't expect you guys to believe this because you said you're an atheist experience, or glad you're not agnostics, but that's fine with me. But the thing that bothers me most of all, I guess I shouldn't say it bothers me, but it's got my curiosity a little bit, is that people equate God to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is not God. God has never been Jesus Christ. That's okay. I mean, some people, and you guys don't. Let's stop right there. You guys don't believe God exists, and it's fine. That's your theory, and that's your thoughts. It's good. I have no problem with that. But what I do want to ask you is that, is there more than one God? Have you guys ever been aware of it?
All right, what part
that's
of
very
we don't
simple.
believe there are any gods did you not get?
Well, I basically say when I see the word atheist, it tells me that you don't believe in God, period.
In any God,
I mean, it's
yes.
supreme being or any God at all that exists in the world, period.
Now, if you're going to ask if there are a whole lot of gods that don't exist, sure. I mean, there's Zeus and Ra and Isis and
yeah,
all those.
and Paul even spoke about it. And when he went through, and I don't want to get there because you can then again still throw myself into kind of a trap here, not on purpose. But there is a God that exists in the world they're not even aware of, and it's kind of hard to explain it.
Well, then how can you make that claim if you're not aware of it?
Well, the fact of it is that I go back to the main context, which you guys don't believe even was written by anyone, or it was made up by a bunch of men. It's called the Bible. I just heard you state that. It wasn't inspired by anybody. So basically, some bunch of guys sat down one day and wrote it up and said, "Hey, let's call this
Well,
God."
not one day. I mean,
Not one
there were
day,
a
not
whole
one
bunch of
guy,
authors.
and honestly, I'm having a hard time following what you're saying because we're not just atheists with regard to the Christian God. We're atheists with regard to every God. And you just made the claim that there is a God that people aren't aware of. And so I'd really love you to explain that because that makes no sense.
Well, there is a God. I know it makes a lot of. It doesn't make any sense from the way of presentation. I apologize about that.
That's all right.
But the God that I'm speaking of is the God of this world, and that's Lucifer, the fallen angel, whatever.
But we don't believe in that guy either.
I hear you, and that's the thing that I really kind of amuses me because he wants you not to believe in him. I mean, if you're going to be
If he doesn't exist, then he doesn't want anything. I mean, you may.
Oh, yes, he does. He wants your soul, partner, and that's what I'm laughing about because
Why?
Okay.
I don't think you're going to go to hell. I personally don't. I don't think So someone that's breathing hell and brimfire on you right now, they're crazy. You're not going to go to hell. I'm sorry.
Well, you said Lucifer wants our soul.
What does
Yeah.
Lucifer actually do with our soul if he gets
Well,
it? I mean,
he wants you to go down with him.
Okay.
and do what?
I guess basically just create more problems for man in their present state.
And so,
But see, I don't
you
agree
believe
that
Lucifer exists.
Well, that's fine with me.
I'm asking. You believe that Lucifer actually exists?
Oh yeah, he does.
And your evidence for this is?
Well, let me see. Every time you see a tornado, a storm, all kinds of neat stuff going on, you explain to me why that happens.
well, if you believe Christianity, then God makes it happen.
What the Bible doesn't say he does. So I have a
Sure it
problem with
does.
that, too.
Sure it does.
And see, that's where-
you should pick up.
Is God not the omnipotent power in the universe?
No. We can settle
Okay.
this in one
Sorry.
thing. There's
Absolutely. You're right. But
hang
but-
on.
but
Stop.
Can I?
Stop. You believe in Lucifer. I just want to clarify the question. I take it then you also believe in the God of the Bible.
Right.
Okay. Who in Isaiah says that I, the Lord, create good and create evil.
You might want to say allow. I don't know about create.
Well, if he's the Alpha and Omega, the beginning, and
Yes, sir.
created everything, then he must have also created evil.
Well, it got there some way. I can't say that he did or didn't.
Well,
but if he
well,
did,
according to your,
I'll
I'm only
agree with-
talking
I'll agree
about
with
your
you 100%.
theology. In
I'll
your
agree with you 100%.
theology, he says he did.
Right.
I don't think. I think this is a fairy tale book myself, and I don't
And
have
that's-
any reason
and
to
that's
believe
your
it
privilege.
exists.
I got nothing against that.
So
I think
what I'm asking is, what is your evidence that makes you think this is actually true? When I asked why you believed in Lucifer, you make an appeal to tornadoes. I apologize if this sounds insulting, but that is asinine.
right.
I mean,
And
a tornado is a natural occurrence that doesn't necessarily connotate anything evil, and certainly doesn't stand up an entire theology about an evil being who's collecting souls. I mean, first you've got to demonstrate that there's any such thing as a soul, or that this being exists, or that it wants it, before you can draw this line to tornadoes.
Okay. Now, you obviously seem pretty well versed in the Bible. That's great. I like this because it
In
tells
fact,
me
I've
one
got
other-
the
I
internet
have one-
right here.
I have one question, and don't give no, please. If you don't, please don't cut me off. for a
Okay.
second.
Okay.
Okay. Then you obviously know there's a second Adam. At least it spoke about one. And I think it's in Romans. It talks about the second Adam. I ain't going to ask you who he is, but this is one thing that was stated along the way. He said, "The thief cometh not to kill, destroy, and steal. I come you have life and have more abundantly." Now, someone either told the truth or they lied, and I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to fight you on this thing. I just was thinking, I personally know that people want the tangible thing. Why does this guy have to die? What did he do? He's been good all his life. He's dead.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to bring him
So
back
you're
to life.
also advocating this idea that Jesus died for our sins. Like you think that's
I didn't say that. The Bible says that. I didn't say that.
okay, but you believe it, right?
Right. You said you agree with the Bible, basically.
I agree that someone had to recreate because somebody just to take care of the first thing that the first Adam couldn't do right.
Why?
Obviously, he didn't do it right. If he hadn't done it right, we wouldn't be in a quagmire we're in right now. Yeah, it's a spiritual
Okay, but
thing.
this all assumes that you accept any of the Bible as anything other than fiction. I mean, I understand that you do, but you're talking at us trying to convince us that God and Lucifer exist and that there has to be a Jesus and stuff, but just basing your words on what the Bible says, and it's got to be true because that's what it says in the Bible. And we're not starting from common ground here.
Let's stop right there. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. What I'm trying to do is just ask you some questions to think about. I don't want you.
Well, I mean,
And if you
the
guys
things,
listen,
hang on.
If you guys don't
hang on.
believe, that's fine. I have no
Hang
problem with
on.
that.
The things that you're asking me to think about, or asking us to think about, you don't think we've thought about these things? I mean, you don't think that, consider me,
absolutely, I
for
do.
example, as somebody who was a fundamentalist Christian and was studying to be a minister, you don't think that I considered these things? Because I did. And
Would
the
it make you
statement,
feel any
let me
better?
finish,
Go ahead, I'm
the
sorry.
statement that the caller made before, and that you seem to endorse this idea of Jesus dying for the sins, here's why I don't accept that. Number one, there's absolutely no evidence, contemporary evidence, that he existed. Number two, there's no evidence that anybody had died and was ever resurrected. Number three, if it actually did happen, I didn't ask for it, and it would be immoral of me to accept this sort of atonement. Also, the sin concept itself is something that is entirely foreign to me, that somebody on high dictates what is good and what is evil. Those are really simple concepts. And this is an oversimplification of it. The idea of original sin, that I am born a sinner who's in need of redemption, is also absurd. The idea of atonement is absurd. For example, if I owe you $20 and Russell forgives me that debt, how does that benefit you? You're still out $20. That's absolutely absurd. The idea of blood sacrifice is absurd and obscene. And the idea that there's an almighty God who created everybody and then had that creation fail, he tried to repair it, had it fail again, he tries to repair it, and then in order to make up a loophole to rules that he created, rather than simply changing the rules, he comes down in bodily form and sacrifices himself to make up for sins for everybody for all time.
Well,
it's one of the most asinine things I've ever heard.
He didn't sacrifice himself, sir. It was his son who gave his life. There is a difference. He is not God, and he never told the Hebrews.
Okay, that's your opinion.
You can
I'm sorry
take that up with fellow theologians.
I'm sorry that there are 1,000 different denominations of Christians.
No, I have no problem, but I just want to thank you guys. I think it's cool that you guys at least acknowledge the non-existence of God, because most people are even afraid to talk about it.
Well, okay.
Thanks.
Appreciate
We'll take
it.
the compliment.
And we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, I'm happy to acknowledge the non-existence of God.
Me too. I'm all for it.
Every day and twice on Sundays.
Although, I mean, I did want to go a little further on this Lucifer topic. But he's gone now. But I mean, I guess the idea was that Lucifer wants our souls, but he's not actually going to do anything with them because we're not going to go to hell. So he just wants us to be here and cause discord among humanity, which, I mean, if you ask me, religion does way more of that than we do.
Yeah. I mean, if he is actually the ultimate deceiver, don't you think it's possible that maybe he's pretending to be a good God and has deceived the majority?
Right.
I mean, if he's got any skills. There's an essay, and I don't have the author, so if this is yours, I apologize. I didn't write this. I've been wanting to kind of touch on this on the air for a long time. And since we talked about Satan, I want to give this a quick run through. It's called The Implausibility of Satan. And it goes, I often hear Christians talk about Satan, the great deceiver. When I tell them that I'm quite confident that there is no such being, they ask me, how can I be so sure? Therefore, I decided to write this article to explain why I find the existence of such a being to be extremely implausible. So who is Satan? Satan is supposedly a powerful supernatural being created by God. God intended Satan to be good, yet Satan turned evil. How is it possible that God, from whom only good things come, created a supernatural being that turned evil? Right off the proverbial bat, this seems to make the idea of Satan hard to believe. Note that Matthew 7:18 says a good tree cannot bear bad fruit. How could the bad fruit of Satan have come from the good tree of God? Say that God did create this supernatural being that turned evil. How is it possible that an omniscient God would not have known that Satan would turn evil? Actually, some have argued that God did know it would happen, so let's look at the question from both angles. If God did know Satan would turn evil, why would God have created Satan? If I made proverbial widgets and I could tell one of my widgets wasn't going to meet my needs, wouldn't I be a fool to make it anyway? If God knew his creation would turn evil and created Satan anyway, doesn't that mean that God wanted Satan to turn evil, or that he was at least ambivalent about it? Some have said that Satan's turning evil was known and taken into account in God's long-term plan. But why would an all-good God need an evil Satan in his long-term plans? One would think that an all-good God would be able to enact whatever plans he has without any need of an evil superbeing. So what if God didn't know that Satan would turn evil? Wouldn't that mean that God is not omniscient? Some argue that because of free will, God's omniscience does not give God the ability to know what decisions will be made by his creations. So perhaps by giving Satan free will, God did not know what Satan would do. But shouldn't a perfect God at least have considered the possibility and made some contingency plan? Let's move on and assume that somehow Satan did turn evil, whether or not God knew about it. Why did God not immediately destroy Satan? Or, if God doesn't want to destroy his own creations, why did God at least not immediately contain Satan, perhaps lock him up in hell, or take away his supernatural powers? I think that Christians say that God will do this at the time of judgment. Why wait? Why let Satan do evil in the meantime? If God can stop Satan now and doesn't, isn't God guilty of allowing evil? Isn't God acting as an accomplice to evil? Now let's assume that there's some explanation for this. So we have Satan, a powerful being, who's intent on corrupting man. Why does Satan only do things surreptitiously? For example, why doesn't Satan shoot intense pain through every human on earth until they confess their allegiance to him? I know that Christians say God acts as a hidden God because he wants to see if we will freely choose him. But it seems unlikely that Satan, a pure evil being, would have any such motivation. So why doesn't Satan just come on down and kill everybody or do whatever he feels like? Maybe God wouldn't allow Satan to act so boldly. Then why does God let Satan operate surreptitiously? God allows Satan to do hidden evil. This doesn't seem to make any sense. One explanation offered by apologist Dr. Hugh Ross is that Satan is not allowed to tempt us more than we are capable of withstanding. So I suppose that means that nobody is ever successfully tempted by Satan, right? If they are, then by definition, they've been tempted more than they can withstand, haven't they? I suppose Dr. Ross is saying that Satan is only allowed to tempt us to the extent that God expects us to be able to withstand. But how could this really work? If he's right and God limits Satan's evil, then Satan is constantly asking God, hey, God, can I shoot massive pain through Joe's body and see if that turns Joe against you? And then God says, no, Satan, you may not. And then Satan says, well, can I kill Joe's baby and see if that makes him turn against you? And then God says, oh, okay, Satan, I guess you can do that. You might think I'm being sacrilegious, but the point is that although some theologies may sound logical when you read them in a book, when you take them off the pages of the book and see how they work in actual practice, they are exposed as just being pat answers that have no real value. If you think, for example, that the pretend conversation between God and Satan is sacrilegious, a very similar conversation is depicted in the book of Job, where Satan convinces God to allow him to kill Job's family and servants. So if someone close to you dies, is it because Satan convinced God to let him kill him? It seems to me that either option, Satan self-limits or his evil, or for some reason God limits Satan's evil, isn't very believable. But say I'm wrong. Say that one or the other of these explains why Satan's evil is at least somewhat constrained. If Satan does anything at all to influence man, how can man be said to have free will, given that Satan has supernatural powers and we don't? How can God really expect us mere mortals to be able to withstand any temptation by a supernatural evil being? If Satan can use supernatural powers even a little bit against us mere mortal humans, how can we trust that we have free will? At least a few Christians believe, for example, that Satan placed fossils on the earth to mislead man into believing in evolution. I know that most Christians do not believe this. I simply found it a convenient example. So let's suppose that Satan did leave these fossils. If true, this would mean that we cannot believe anything we see, or any of what our senses tell us about what could just be satanic delusions. How can we have free will if there's nothing that we can know for certain? Thus, again, I say if Satan can use any of his supernatural powers against us, then free will doesn't exist. By the way, does Satan not know that God is omnipotent? How dumb could Satan be to think he could possibly win out against the omnipotent creator of everything, including himself? Some Christians say that Satan does know he'll eventually lose, but he just wants to take as many people down to hell with him as he can. But how could Satan have ever been dumb enough to even consider revolting against God in the first place, knowing full well that he couldn't possibly win? And how could a third of God's angels have been dumb enough to join Satan, as they too should have known from the beginning that they have no real chance to win? And what's the reason for God not revealing himself to us in obvious ways? When a skeptic asks this question, Christians often claim that God has the answer, that God feels that if we had absolute proof of his existence, we wouldn't have the free will to reject him. But this is precisely what Satan and a third of the angels did. If Satan could have proof positive evidence of God and still have free will to disobey God, then why couldn't we also have proof positive evidence of God? Finally, if Satan could become evil because of free will, how will God ever solve the problem of evil? Couldn't tomorrow some other creation of God use its free will to turn evil also? Couldn't this continue to happen for all eternity? How can heaven be any better than earth if it is subject to the same problems of free will, allowing beings to choose evil? I don't believe an all-good God could have created a powerful supernatural being that turned evil. But even if I'm wrong, I don't believe an omniscient God could have known that it would happen, or at least make contingency plans. But if somehow this evil did come to exist, I don't think an all-good God could let it continue to be evil. In fact, even if this peril was for some reason at least somewhat restrained, then the fact that he having supernatural powers could have influence over us means that we don't truly have free will. So from start to finish, the concept of an all-evil super being is untenable.
Now, you said you didn't know who wrote that, but thanks to the entirely human-created miracle of wireless internet,
Dun, dun, dun.
it was done by Paul Dolan. And if you liked that, then you can also look on infidels.org to find an even longer article critiquing Lee Strobel's case for faith and case for a creator.
Right.
So good stuff there.
I probably got it from infidels.org myself not too long ago. So let's take another couple calls real quick. We've got Jay. You there?
Yeah, we're talking at the first part of the program about would you give your life if you was in the military and things of that nature. But I don't think you think of giving your life for your buddy. You're there to help him because you're going to rely on him to help you. Mm-hmm. And when I did back in Korean War, yes, I was a veteran. I pulled 9 out of possible 11 that went through the ice in the truck. Couldn't get to the other 2 because my body temperature got too low. Now, out of that 9, 2 died. 7 lived. And I've often wondered, as you know, that I'm an old gay man. And all the subject about being gay and all this, I wondered, was it worth it really, in my sense, in a different way, what you would be thinking, that I jeopardized my life to save 7 people that might have been people that hated gay people. So that was what I was thinking when you said, what would you do? Would you just give your life to save a buddy or something?
Yeah.
You don't look at it as facing death in a sense. You look at it as a part of a job that you do. You react in that sense. And I don't think that if you believe in a God or not believe in it, that has any factor in it. It's the camaraderie that you have with that person. And even if you don't know them, it's still the way that you've been trained to, hey, these are Americans, you try to go out on the limb for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'd also say that, most of the time nobody would give their life for a person if there was 100% possibility that they'd die, but a lot of people would be a lot more willing to risk their lives for somebody depending on how great the risk is and how close they feel to the person.
Yeah, there's a difference between jumping in front of the train or pushing somebody out of the way of the train, diving across. You might die, but at least you have some chance of saving both of you versus the other one's going to die.
Right.
For sure.
I mean, and I would never say that we make these sort of cold calculations in our head that, how well do I know this person? And, there's an 83.7% probability that I'll live.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that
but our genes do it for us.
Yeah.
Well, you go back in history, look at Audie Murphy. Times that he actually, I guess, risked his life was many, many, many times. And the majority of the time, probably all he knew, those were Americans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fighting an enemy. And that's what he went there to conquer, was the enemy and not his,
Yeah, there's not a lot of time for game theory and thinking things through in combat situations. It's pretty much you're acting on instinct, you're trusting your gut. But that's something that we've talked about a few times in the show, is that we go through life basically trusting our instincts and trusting our gut. Most people don't sit around and think about difficult questions in great detail, and if they do, they certainly don't bother to do it over and over and over again. What we could say is kind of a beneficial way to or what happens to everybody is, as you consider things, you build up a sort of heuristic model in your head that informs all of your other decisions. What you've considered to be reasonable or unreasonable, what you've demonstrated skepticism towards, which things have proven reliable, which things have proven unreliable, help build up a model so that when some new information comes in, you don't have to think about it forever. You can, and it may often be beneficial to consider it in detail, but mostly you act based on your gut instinct and you go with what has worked for you in the past. And the one thing that I would say that we try to do, or that I would try to do as somebody who used to be religious and isn't anymore, is to point out to people how to improve that tool set, that critical thinking tool set, how to improve the heuristic model in their mind that allows them to make decisions so that they make better decisions. If the better your critical thinking skills are honed, then the more likely you are to make the correct or best decision with just gut instinct. And the less likely you are to accept false premises as true. So when somebody comes up to you and tells you, hey, my aunt was abducted by aliens, you don't have to sit around and go, now, let's see, her aunt lives out in a rural area, and most aliens tend to visit there based on the reports. You can actually, kind of get yourself to a position where you can assess with a quick judgment, oh, that's kind of crazy talk. But you don't have to dismiss everything that way. I'm not advocating a sort of skeptics or atheist life where you go around saying, nope, that's not true, nope, that's not true. Nothing is true until you can demonstrate it to me absolutely. Life doesn't work that way. But developing the skill set that allows you to determine which claims are more likely true or more likely false, that's critical. And unfortunately, most people never really get to develop a good set of tools for that, whether it's because of an inundation from religion at a young age, whether it's because of problems with our schools where we teach the test or teach people what to think instead of how to think. A lot of people don't get a good tool set. So I think if there's any list of goals for this program and the ACA and other organizations like CFI, it's to help people improve that tool set so they can make good decisions. But thanks a lot for calling, Jay. Appreciate it. We've got about 8 minutes or so left. There's one more. Is it Lee?
Yeah.
Yes.
How you doing, Lee?
Doing good. How you guys doing?
Not bad.
Fine.
What are y'all's names? I haven't caught that yet.
I'm Matt.
I'm Russell.
Matt and Russell. Now, how did you, Matt, go from were you a minister before you did this?
No, I wasn't a minister. I was a software engineer, but I lost my job and took some time off and decided to get back towards my beliefs and reaffirm them, and was studying with the hopes of being a minister. But I wasn't ever actually a minister.
And when did you go from thinking, or what happened in your life that made you go from thinking, God is great to God sucks or whatever?
I don't know if I put it quite that simply, but nothing actually happened apart from studying. I mean, my goal was to reaffirm my faith and to come up with good answers to those who would be critical of faith, to be an apologist, essentially, like Lee Strobel or Josh McDowell or anybody else. And what I found over the course of those studies of trying to answer the difficult questions that skeptics would raise is that there aren't answers, there aren't any good answers, and the skeptics were right to raise those questions, that my beliefs were unfounded.
Your beliefs in Jesus.
Sure. But I didn't just stop there. I didn't just say, oh, the Christianity thing is bunk, so all the rest of it must be as well. I spent a number of years studying all kinds of different claims about not only different religions, but the God question in general.
Okay, so you didn't have like a Saul to Paul awakening where the light hit you and you changed or anything?
No, I don't think you'd find an analogy that works in that direction. Really.
Well, I was going in reverse, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Okay, all right.
And nobody, and also just because it comes up from time to time, I didn't have anybody close to me die. I didn't suffer a great loss or an injury. I wasn't abused. I wasn't mistreated. I had no problems with people in the church. There wasn't some catastrophic event. I was honestly working to be a better Christian and failed.
So okay. So logic kind of pushed God out of your life.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the atheist community, is that a national organization or is that a worldwide or?
No, this is just Austin.
But atheist-community.org.
That's just us in Austin.
Oh, it's just Austin. Right?
We got the domain first.
Okay, good for you. And what do y'all hope to achieve? I mean, what is y'all's goal? Just to try to get us just to have fun and talk about God, or is it try to get all of us to think that God doesn't exist so we can be part of your group? I mean, what's the goal of your group?
May I?
Please, because there's one I forgot, and I'm sure you'll hit it.
Well, yeah, we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but I mean, we're not here to talk about, we're not here to try to get you or our neighbors or anyone else to turn into atheists. But at the same time, there is kind of a social taboo in America against talking openly about disagreement with the norm, about disagreeing with Christianity. there's an assumption that everybody is Christian. I mean, I can tell you I've had on more than one occasion, I've moved into a new place, and as soon as I get there, the first thing my new neighbors want to say to me is, hey, you want to try out our church? Which is very nice of them, but I mean, it's also considered rude if I say, no, not only do I not want to try out your church, but I don't believe in your God. I mean, that's seen as a personal attack. We're not here to attack anyone, but we think that having the TV show kind of directly assaults the taboo by saying, hey, there are people in the world who don't believe in your God. We think that it's a reasonable position, and we're willing to have open and honest discussions about it and not censor ourselves.
There's another aspect which I forgot to mention earlier, and it's actually one of the primary missions of the ACA. It's in our Constitution that we chartered with the nonprofit organization, and that is to say, to let atheists know that they're not alone, to establish an actual community, not just converting people or deconverting people from religious beliefs to accepting atheism, because there's nothing to accept in atheism. There's no dogma, no tenets. It's just, you don't believe in a God, you're an atheist. But there are plenty of people out there, estimates maybe even as high as 14% of the population of the United States are non-religious, probably closer to 5 to 7% are atheists. And without fail, most of them think that they're the only ones. Because there's such a small percentage, and because there's this taboo that Russell mentioned about, being vocal as an atheist, I run across people all the time who say, holy cow, I had no idea you guys were out there, and you actually get together and talk about stuff, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. It's not like we.
But what about some tenets of your organization? Like the Old Testament is don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't covet your neighbor's things and things of this nature. I mean, what if you convert us all to atheism? What are we going to do how are we going to know right and wrong? Are we just
you would have to think for yourself and figure it out.
Huh?
There aren't any tenets. There aren't any dogma.
Well, how are we going to know how to live? I mean, how are we going? I mean, just going to know it? We're going to wake up one day, we're going to be born, and we're going to go, well, okay, that's just how you treat other people.
Isn't that what you already did? I mean,
are we all
you're asking.
We kind of start out kind of crazy, and we're real selfish beings. And
No. Because
we have these animalistic, actions towards our neighbor to take what we can and get what we can. And aren't there certain things that kind of help us keep that under control so that we don't get out of control?
Yes,
how do we do that with your
It's
society?
called society and laws, and you already live in a society that has.
The society I lived in was pretty much founded on a lot of principles of not killing and stealing and
okay, and what does that have to?
These are all biblical principles that go back hundreds